What is going on, everybody? You are about to listen to a phenomenal episode with Ben Killoy. We had some technical issues during the episode, which made it a little bit difficult to get all of the video to remain in place. So this is going to be an audio-only podcast. So if you are here on YouTube, you can still listen to it, obviously. If you're listening anywhere else, you're not even going to notice that it's audio-only because you don't usually watch a video anyways. But this is a great opportunity to know that we do have a YouTube channel. You can find it at the BizDad. So you can go over to the YouTube channel to watch all of these episodes. But we are really excited to have this amazing episode with Ben. He is a former military veteran, just like me. We've got on a podcast together years and years ago, and I was stoked to get him on my podcast now. But for those of you, again, that are tuning in here on YouTube, there were some video issues with the podcast, so it is going to be an audio-only podcast. But thank you so very much for listening. Please let us know what you think about the episode, and we'll see everybody on the next one. See ya.
Welcome to the BizDad Podcast, where we dive into the melding of fathership and entrepreneurship with your host, the original BizDad himself, Adam Labar. Adam is a Christian, a former Air Force officer, a dad to 3 amazing kids, a coach, a real estate investor, and a business owner. On this podcast, he'll explore the unique journeys of amazing dads who are striving for greatness in both business and family. So whether you're a dad who is an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply a man striving to be a better dad, get ready as the BizDad brings you conversations to inspire, challenge, and equip you to be a better dad and entrepreneur. And now, here's Adam.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the BizDad Podcast. Today, I am very excited to have a long-awaited conversation. I think our messages have gone back over a year on trying to get this thing figured out to find some time for the two of us. But Ben Killoy, a fellow veteran, a fellow Iraq War veteran, if I recall correctly, looking forward to having a good conversation with you about being a dad, running business. You and I have very similar paths at the moment. But if you can, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about your family and tell us about your business.
Well, I got to correct. I'm not an Iraq War veteran of like going to Afghanistan or Iraq, but I was in during that time, except the Marine Corps sent me to Okinawa. So I did the exact opposite of what everybody else
shucks.
did. So.
You know, for some reason, I thought you were in Iraq around the same time as me, but I guess not.
And we could go into that, but that actually created its own veteran transition issues. Yeah. But overall, I'm just turned 40, so I'm at this halfway mark where the back 9 is behind me and the front 9 is what I'm most excited about because I spent the last 10 years essentially working my way out of a hole that I fell into when I turned 30. And I've never been more excited for the future because as I pulled myself out of my hole, I've learned that all these different things from human development, from leadership to personal coaching, all of these things have gone together and they're skill sets that the world pays for. So I've taken everything that I started with because my business when we first met was in military fatherhood. And I podcasted on that, did 500 episodes, taught me a lot about myself, fatherhood, leadership. And over the last 5 years, I've morphed that into a consulting business. So in the last year, when we welcomed our 4th kid, something happened with my wife. Previously, she wanted to always teach. And then when Evan came, she's like, I don't know if I want to do this forever. So I'm like, what I'm doing now is not big enough to pay for everything because I just orbited her dream because I treated it like pi. It was always 3.14. And then that constant fell apart. So in the last year and a half, it's been building a business, building traction, building the relationships to have a $200,000 consulting business. Not yet, but that's the goal because that's what it's going to take to keep everything paid and go bigger than I've ever gone before. And then also, even from that same context, taking everything that I've learned and realizing a lot of my inner beliefs were what was holding me back. And that even more of what I realize every day is I'm even better at my job than I think I am.
Nice.
And continuing to lean into that more. But my wife's a kindergarten teacher. We've got 4 kids, 13, 10, and 8, and now 19 months old, which is Evan, my business partner, because I also raise him during the day when my wife's in school. So there is no manual for keeping an infant alive, but I can tell you doing coaching calls, holding him in my arms while doing a bottle has been something I did last year. But I would say even in the spring, we were in this kind of romantic phase of toddlerhood where we could sit and have coffees in the morning and he would sit in my lap for an hour and we could talk and he would be fine. And he takes naps now consistently so I could get my work done. But the craziest part of like trying to do this is I get more done in the 3 hours during nap than I previously could get done in 8 hours a day, which is just Parkinson's law at its finest, where the task will always expand to the time you allot it. So really, it's actually helped my business by only working during nap time, because then I'm more ridiculously focused on what I need to get done, and I strip away all the noise and the random things that distract you. And even the random lesson that every entrepreneur has to learn is just because you're at your computer for 8 hours doesn't mean you did work that's going to pay the bills.
Boy, don't I know it.
That is a key distinction, that growing up at a farm, my dad worked every day and hard work on the farm, and every day is a manual labor. And I thought that as long as I was working hard, that's how you make money. And it's like, no, just because you're working hard doesn't mean you're making money. And that distinction was only something I just figured out like 2 years ago. And so allowing myself to work smarter is even a lot of what real estate is about, working smarter, because you can't win every deal, but you got to be in the right rooms and the right deals at the right time, and you got to know when to walk away. And all of that insight, like that's often the next level stuff that, like, I feel like I'm at year 5 of entrepreneurship. It's crazy how entrepreneurs on the internet sell you the internet phase within do it 90 days. Yeah. And here I am at 5 years feeling like I'm just now getting lift. It's like, man, the internet really does not sell the truth that we're going to sell it 90 days, but it's really going to take 5 years.
Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that the internet lies? I have spent the last 25 years thinking that it's all truth. Since the days of asking ASL in chat rooms, I totally thought that this is what it was, all truth. No, I really do want to rewind to the farm side of the house, because I love to go back and kind of understand where my guests come from. So Ben, tell me about growing up, living on a farm. Tell me about your parents. Tell me about what it was like, especially your dad. What kind of things did you learn from him? What sort of things did you are you repeating, and what sort of things are you running away from that you kind of saw growing up?
So I grew up on the same farm that my dad grew up on, and his father bought it in the 60s. So he was maybe in middle school, I think, when they moved to the farm. And him and my dad were with each other every day, and my dad was hooked on farming. And then when I was 4, my grandfather had a heart attack in our milk house, and he was gone. So that kind of was like the precipice of where life started changing, because before that, there was a certain dad that I had, and after that, there was a different kind of dad I had. And in the next 3 years, I kind of pulled away from the farm, and I could never figure out why. And I ultimately think it's because that relationship changed when he passed. And so I was always kind of pulled away from the farm growing up, but I always did the chores and different baling hay and the different things that go with it. So it wasn't a complete disconnect, but I knew early on, like, I didn't want to be a farmer. I got hooked on computers. I got pulled away towards that. And I never felt like, other than the legacy part that, oh, you're the son of a farmer, you should take over the farm. Like that inherent burden that's placed on sons of fathers that farm. So like that was something, even all the way up to 30. I remember I get to live my dream until he passes away, and then I got to go finish his. And I always didn't give myself permission to go be me. It was, you can go be me, but right up until you have to go back and finish his dream, because that's what farmers' sons do. And essentially, I've disconnected from that in the last 10 years and realized that wasn't meant for me. Like God had bigger things in store for me. But he definitely taught me different things around work ethic and different things around managing time and even managing your resources. He was always grew up from his dad of cash is king. And so learning how to steward your resources well, and also learning how you don't need to scale in order to get what you need, because instead of going to like the 3,000 acre farms that other people have, he has the same 210 acres he had 30 years ago. He's got the same grain dryer that he's had for probably 40 years now. It still grinds like not even probably a half of a combine. It's like a quarter of a combine at a time. And it just goes slow and steady. You can go out, you can fill 2 wagons, and that's probably your morning, and you do 2 wagons in the afternoon, and you just spend 3 weeks picking the 210 acres, and you still got a 6-row head. So it's kind of teaching that you don't need to follow the curve of everything needs to be bigger, better, automatic tractors, everything like that, the biggest, whatever. And that's a lot of traps where farmers get stuck in. And I'm sure that's the same in real estate, where you just over leverage debt because you're trying to keep up with every other real estate person out there on the internet. So he taught me to temper that and realize use what you have, and then also go forward from that. But as a farm kid growing up in the middle of nowhere, friend, and also being I was the only boy. So I had two sisters, one older, one younger. I always had a yearning to be with other men, that there was always this brotherhood connection that like anytime even my cousin would come over, it would just be instant, like, feels refreshing. And so that was always kind of like something in the background for me. And growing up and then going into the Marine Corps was like the exact opposite. I was very sheltered. I didn't see a lot of movies. We didn't have cable. If it wasn't on regular TV, I didn't see it. And everyone, when I got to the Marine Corps, would always kind of joke. I'm like, yeah, I don't know how many times I got to tell you I grew up under a rock. I didn't watch that movie. I don't know who that joke is about from that movie. I was never up on the pop culture movie jokes. But it really kind of then opened my eyes going to Okinawa, like growing up on a farm in the middle of Wisconsin, and then going to Okinawa was like, oh my gosh. And then going to Korea, the Philippines, it's like, it taught me how big the world was. But then even at the same time, getting out of the Marine Corps, I kind of lost sight of that part, because then I went right back into a box. And then for the next 7 years, I've tried to be like everybody else and couldn't fit in. And then that American dream became my American hell. And then I spent the last 10 years trying to figure out, well, what the hell is my dream? That's not someone else's. It's not what the world told me to be. And something I like to always think about it as like, when God said your name before anybody else heard it, what did he intend you to be? And so like, that's been my aim for the last 10 years, essentially.
Hey, everybody, wanted to step in to discuss something. If you're anything like me, you've ran into some time in your business where you feel a little overwhelmed with some of the mundane tasks that eat up your valuable time. You're working more in the business than you are on the business, right? If that's you and you're hearing this and you're saying, boy, it is time to reclaim some of my schedule back, to focus on what truly matters. You want to get time back with elite remote talent with zero time zone hassle. Check out one of my partners that I just recently partnered up with, BizDad&x.com/Adam is where you go to check these folks out. Delegate $10 an hour tasks to focus more on the $1,000 an hour tasks, the things that are really transforming your business. Get rid of some of those transactional things and do some more of the transformational inside of your business. So again, schedule your free strategy call at wisevas.com/Adam. Wise, WISEVAS.com/Adam. Again, let's get rid of some of those transactional tasks and move them into transformational tasks. It's been a phenomenal team to work with. I really look forward to sharing them with you. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'll be happy to discuss with you what's going on as well. But again, wisevas.com/Adam. Thank you very much. And now back to the episode. Let me go back to those 7 years post-military and kind of break that down a little bit, where the American dream became your American hell, as you said, or living hell, or whatever the words were there. So what was it that you felt like you were going back to or running towards in that time frame when you left the Marines?
Well, I got out of the Marines with an odd thought, because I wasn't in self-development, but I got out with the simple idea that the Marine Corps was going to hold me back, that I wasn't a good shooter. I wasn't a good runner, which are two things that get you promoted faster. I only got corporal like 6 months before getting out because of time and grade points. It wasn't because of any other performance points. So I continually felt like I didn't belong there, and it was always going to hold me back. And I was a really good, like, educated Marine, ethics, integrity. I was good at my job, but oddly enough, that's not how you get promoted. And so in the way that the Marine Corps measures you, I always felt like, you know, I didn't belong. So I was like, I'm going to get out, and I'm meant for something bigger, is how I told myself. But the problem is, and when you get out, they issue you this standard American dream that has like 3 roads, maybe a tech school, maybe you use your job if you're like a motor T or heavy equipment. I was a generator mechanic, so I kind of did, because I went and worked for a major generator manufacturer. But at the same time, it was kind of littered with some advice my dad always told me, that the goal to life is you get a job, you keep your head down, and you wait for retirement. And so I kind of accepted that as truth and wisdom. But at the same time, that made me try to make myself smaller. That it wasn't about how big you could be. It was about how small you could keep yourself without getting sniped, essentially. And that box that I essentially put myself into, which allowed me to get stuck in a cube, it led me to some interesting things, because eventually I led to teaching different generator mechanics how to work on generators. And I realized I was good at teaching. I realized I was good at technical writing. And I realized I was good at a lot of things, but those boxes. It was almost like the world and the corporate world kept telling me I was too much, because that was a common theme over however, maybe it's called 14 years that I had a corporate career, that it was always like, you're a little too much, Ben. We need you to turn it down. And then I would think that there was something wrong with me, and which then makes it even harder to be something that I work on now, is being more assertive. I was never an assertive person, and I never even had that word top of mind. And now it's like, well, in order to be assertive, you got to know who you are, and you've got to be confident in who you are. And you also have to know that who you are doesn't really have a lot of bugs, that you're not secretly a dick and no one's wanting to tell you, that you're a kind, assertive person, you're a caring, assertive person, and you're also confident in what you do speak. So those are the things that I had to grow into in the last 10 years. But in those first few, there was just no mold where I could see like, this feels like there's supposed to be something more, and it doesn't happen. And it kind of reached a precipice. So in 2014, I had a 2-year-old daughter at the time, a son on the way. And I remember putting my daughter to bed one night and just looking at her eyes and thinking, who the hell am I to be your dad if I can't even lead myself? And it was like this internal self-leadership conundrum of, I can't lead myself. I'm not leading my family well. And I'm supposed to lead you into this world, and I can barely do it for myself. And what I ultimately didn't have together at the time was my self-leadership. I had forgotten the Marine Corps ethos of know thyself and seek self-improvement. So in a world that says there's something wrong, it was not in like, no, you need to lead yourself well. You need to have your good habits. You need to have your gym habits in order. You need to have your eating habits in order. You need to have your mental health in order. Like, those were not standard programming in TAPS. And so I didn't pay attention to them. I was also going for electrical engineering at the time too. So, and I just failed 2 classes in that. And I was like, this is not working. I just failed 2 classes that I would have to retake in order to have them count. And I was like, man, and it was like 5 years to graduation. And I'm just like, this just sucks. And so I dropped out, but then I was like, well, wait a minute, that was supposed to make everything better. Now what? Like, where do I go next? And so then I was in like the 6-month hole. And then I went to a it was a workshop on how to be a supervisor at work, because I had recently been promoted. And this person was talking about leadership. And I was like, raising my hand left and right. And I was like, I love this. I just forgotten I was good at it. And it was something I remember learning when I was platoon sergeant in the Marine Corps as well for a few months, that I was like, I love helping people see who I see. And one of my favorite things is the people that they gave up on them and labeled them bad Marines, essentially taking them and helping them reflect back the Marine I see, and then creating an environment where they get to step into that. And I was like, that's leadership at its best. And so now, even in my business, in my one-on-one coaching, like, or even I've also done some different things now in the present of doing some workshops with addiction recovery, where I don't have an addiction story, but I'm able to help them. And essentially what I've kind of realized is I'm just really good at reflecting who God sees, and maybe someone in their life was never that person to help them see who God intended them to be. And there's just a lot of bad stories about how life works, who they are, who they're not, that are in the way. And I've stripped so many of those stories away in my life that I now realize and can see them very clearly and quickly, of like, no, yeah, there's a story there. Let's strip that away and like throw it out and like, go be you now. And they're like, oh my gosh, I never realized it was that simple. It's like, yeah, you just got to peel back the layers.
When we start to look at the stories that we're telling ourselves, or the stories that somebody has said about us, and we apply that to us as a human being instead of us as an incident or a thing that we've done or have gone through, we can put a lot of labels on that. So a story that the reason stories are so powerful, and I mean, the Bible is written with a ton of stories in it, right? Because it's super powerful to be able to help people understand and see some things. But you can
see yourself in those stories.
You can see yourself in the stories. You could feel it. But then if we take a different story that somebody has said about us or that we're telling about ourselves, it is also just as powerful. So if we make it a negative story and a crappy story, then guess what we're going to feel? Negative and crappy. So we need to figure out how to adjust those stories. Is this just a story that I'm telling myself, or is this actually me? Yeah, strip the story away. Let's see what it actually means. Let's see what I am and who I am underneath all of that. And I think that's a lot of work that people need to be able to do to be able to get through it. What sort of changes did you see in yourself as you kind of started to do all of that over those, it was 14 years in a corporate job, right? So you're working through that and then becoming putting in a leadership role there, and then slowly starting to reframe who you are as you're kind of going through there. So what sort of changes did you start to see that led you toward going, I need to be an entrepreneur instead of doing this corporate stuff?
Maybe my short version of my story was early on, and I would say this story ran for maybe 35 years of my life. I was just a dumb farm boy from Wisconsin who was never going to do anything special. And that just was resonant to the core because I just always felt out of place. I always felt that I was the opposite of everybody. And then I never knew where I belonged. And so that always just kind of makes you feel like okay, I'll just be in the shadows, which is where a lot of my early story, even the Marine Corps, in a world where people are raising their hand and volunteering for things at boot camp, my goal was always to be invisible. And I didn't have that insight at the time, but that was a key component of my story is if you're not seen, then you can't get volunteered. And it's just, if you're not seen, then you'll just be what people need you to be, invisible. And so rewriting that story now is essentially, I'm a farm boy from Wisconsin who's going to impact the world, but not by helping a bunch of other people. I frame it in a way of, I'm going to help impact the world by changing how I see the world. And those stories help me see the world differently. And a lot of times I always like to think of stories like lenses, that those lenses sometimes have a scratch, sometimes they're foggy, or if you've ever seen the eagle eye sunglasses that give you HD clarity on that commercial, it's kind of sometimes like that. Are you seeing the world in HD, or do you have these sunglasses on that are even making it even better? And those stories have essentially led me to even these small moments where, even as I've never had a beard, but for the last 5 years, I've had a beard. And there'll be times now, and especially as I'm working on a weight goal and been shedding 30 pounds in the last year, but I've shed it on and I put it back on and I've shed it. So I'm like in this refined, like we're going all the way and we're not going back. And in this new phase, there's moments where I'll just walk by a mirror and it's like, man, I look good today. Or even here on Zoom when I'm joining for a client and they haven't joined yet and I see my reflection, I'm like, God, I look good today.
So you were talking about the beard and complimenting yourself. Yeah.
So that complimenting part of me is that complimenting component, that is something new that I've done. So it's almost these moments where I can see like a different belief in myself, because really that's what these stories are ultimately changing inside me, is who I believe I am and who I believe I'm not. And as those change, I can see on a daily basis my confidence. Even an odd moment 2 weeks ago, I noticed my voice in church was even more pitched and on tune instead of sounding out of tune and horrible like I used to. And it was almost like there was an energy stuck in my vocal cords that's now gone. And a refined version of myself, even from just singing, and something has already kind of coming through. So in some ways, it's those layers of energy that get stuck and you don't even know they're there. But then when they're gone, things just feel roomier. Mm-hmm.
What sort of effect has your wife seen in you in that?
Essentially, for those, it's really even the ability to raise Evan has been a key component of that. And seeing how connected Evan and I are, and also even this odd thing that happens where Evan's always better behaved with me. And that component where I'm in control of my emotions, that I can lead the family well. I can lead Evan through an emotion. I can step in for where she might be overwhelmed. It's that, let's call it a refined, functional masculinity energy that can bring calm to chaos. It can bring strength to a moment that's weak. And it's that moment where she's learning. And even something that I just told her, because something I didn't mention was a year into our marriage, her dad died. And something that I apologized for a couple of weeks ago was, I'm sorry I wasn't the man that you needed when he passed away, but I am that man now. And so it was kind of just like closing that door of like, I realize that all of our kids should be just like Evan, but because I wasn't that man, they're not. And in many ways, Evan will be completely different than the first three because I'm a different man than I was when I was raising them. And because of the age gap, they've been running on their own early code for me in those early years. And Evan's got a completely different grounded code with me. And I'm excited every day that I really get to, and even this funny thought that pops in is, I honestly never knew fatherhood could feel this good at this point with raising Evan. Like there's just a joy, there's a presence that I realized like, man, I was present. I think I was an average dad in the spectrum, but now knowing that there's a whole other level, I didn't realize I was playing at level 4. I kind of thought I was a level 8 maybe. And then realizing now it's like, no, like that was me playing small and not stepping into my role and not owning my masculine journey at the same time.
When you got married, you said a year after you got married, so you hadn't had kids yet that your father-in-law passed. So what was it that you were really struggling with then that you were able to identify, within the last year to be able to apologize to your wife about? And what did she kind of think about that? What kind of conversation did that lead to?
Didn't necessarily lead to a conversation with the apology, but it was just a moment that I wanted to close. And it came to me kind of when I was sitting in church, so I felt like it was a bit of a divine wording. But I would say the man that I wasn't is someone that was willing to create that safe space for the shelter that she would need to heal and grieve and to guide her through that storm that it does happen when you lose your father. And that, let's call it the protect and provide and the preside of the masculinity. Like I was providing, but really that was it. And there wasn't a strength in my presence. There was a weakness, and there was still a deep fear of being me in many ways, because I didn't know what me was. And I was spending a lot of energy not being me because I didn't feel like I knew who me was. And so it was like that insecure even where I wouldn't confidently assert myself or stand up or even fight for what I knew was right, even if maybe she was asking for something, and like where it's like, no, that's not where we're going. And truly like leading our family to the place where we knew. And even from a spiritual point of view, like when you create a family, God's entrusting you with that kingdom to protect it, to lead it, to focus towards Christ. And those were not things that I was doing. I was not. Even now, my relationship with God is 500% deeper than it ever was back then. And I was in the kiddie pool of faith. And even my spiritual practice of going to church, like it was all just weak and mediocre. And I had no idea who God wanted me to be. I had no idea God's plan for men and husbands in their families. And so without that wording, or let's better frame it, without that story of who I'm supposed to be, I didn't know who to step into.
So obviously your youngest is a boy and your oldest, I think you said, is a girl. How about the 10 and the 9-year-old?
So the 10-year-old is a boy, and then the next one is a girl.
So you went girl, boy. Nice.
Which was the best part of Evan is he broke the curse of Dylan, my son, growing up without a brother. So watching those two is almost healing for myself in some ways of growing up without one. It's like, the crazier thing is when Evan was born, he was 9. And I was like, when Evan's 9, Dylan will be 18. And I'm like, man, Dylan's going to teach him a whole bunch of bad habits so much faster than Dylan ever learned. Because Dylan's fairly innocent in most things still. And I'm like, that's all going to be gone by the time Evan gets his age, because Dylan's going to be in all the different things that you get into in high school, and he's going to be driving and talking. And I remember how enchanted I was with older kids and high schoolers back then. So I'm positive Evan's going to look up to Dylan in a strong way, which also even more speaks to why it's so important for me to be more, is because Dylan's looking up to me. And it's kind of like this framework that I now understand, that like the kind of man you need to be is the kind of man that you're okay with your daughter bringing home one day. And if that terrifies you, that's your fault, not hers. But then also being the kind of man that your son can copy, that when he walks home with a girl, that they're okay welcoming him into the family. Like those two are like the highest calling outside of marriage that we have at our responsibility. And I didn't understand that weight of how much they're going to follow in my footsteps, and how the footsteps that I was setting for were not the ones that I even wanted to follow. So it was a complete disconnect in the kind of man that I ever wanted my kids to bring home.
Well, that's actually exactly why I wanted to know the boy-girl side of the house on where they were, right? So my boys, if you ask them, they'll tell you what my goal is to raise them to be better men than me. And my goal for my daughter is to raise her to find a better man than me, right? So, I need to have that bar set really high. I fail miserably on a daily basis on setting the bar where I want it to be. And I think that's good. I don't think it's good to be a failure, but I think it's good to have that high bar set to the point where you do fail once in a while. But you had mentioned how Evan was going to be probably a different child than your other three, just because you are a different man. And I'm curious what your thoughts are with Dylan on raising him at a new stage where you're at. Like, what are your goals now as you look at it and say, okay, well, I may have missed the mark a few times in these areas, but this is where my new bar is set. What are your goals now as you're raising Dylan? And I'll get to your daughters as well, but what's your goal now as you're raising Dylan?
I would say it's so, because you also have to temper, because as a father, there's 3 million things you could worry about, but you can't, because we're not God, so we can only protect our kids so much. But Dylan and I started something new that we've been trying to do, but this year I decided to make it happen. We went camping for 2 days. So it was tent camping. He's never been camping. I've been camping once, but it was like a 6-day overlanding trip across Wisconsin. And that was like kind of my baptism into camping. And I fell in love with it, even though I had no background in camping, no habits in the outdoors.
You don't count your Marine Corps camping as camping? I mean, spending days in the field.
No, there was nothing about that made me enchanted to go back to it. I was even describing what a hooch was to my son, because they make it with the 3 tent poles and the fabric, and you have a Marine on each side of the poles and your hooch, and then you have hooch drills in boot camp. But even just the first night, he was just chopping wood with the axe, and he's just like, man, this feels good. I'm taking my anger out on the wood, and I'm like, yes, like that's the place where men are supposed to express that anger and that aggression and having those healthy outlets. So a lot of what we did, and this is even applies to some cases with the same thing I do with my kids or my daughters, is it's less about getting them the exact thing that I need them to follow, but I really prioritize making sure they consistently feel safe, that we can talk about anything. Because something that I've learned as I explored traumas in different categories, there can be really traumatic events that you might even have where, even for men, maybe you were sexualized at a really young age, or whether you're a daughter and somehow in high school something happened and you kept it silent. So you can have bad things happen and you had to be silent. That's horrible and traumatic, but the real deeper trauma happens because you didn't feel safe going to your parents. Like, that's actually the core wound, is you had to suffer in silence, and that you couldn't go tell your parents that you were hurting and someone hurt you. And so I'm always kind of narrowing in on, stuff is always going to happen. The world is always going to have bad things happening, but on every day together, we can get through anything. Like, that's something I say to them over and over and over. And even a few times, although he didn't really ask any deep questions, I asked him, I'm like, is there any random question? This camping trip is one where you can ask me everything from the stuff they talk about in health class this year to all the way to anything random. Because I'm just like, we need safe spaces as men, especially for boys, to be able to talk about those harder things that often don't get defined by their fathers. And something I learned within the podcasting days on fatherhood is there's 2 ways that they'll learn about things. You can let them learn about something from the world, or you can always make sure that how they learn from it from you, because your definition will always hold more weight. But if you have to let them learn about it from the world, then you're always kind of picking up the pieces. And the world doesn't always have your best interest. We've seen that over and over in the last 5 years, especially coming out of COVID. So the enemy is always at work influencing your kids in ways that you don't even subtly realize. Even there's times with sports. Like, think of sports and how sometimes in an over sports family that can take away the priority of the marriage, can take away the priority of finances, or stretching your finances too long. Like, you're turning their hearts away from their father. And interesting, something I learned along the way as well, that the last thing God said to us with the spoken voice was, he was telling men to turn our hearts towards our children. And the enemy is consistently always trying to turn our kids' hearts away from us. And so I'm always consistently focusing on creating that space with my son and my daughters, that no matter what happens, we can talk to anything, because I'm not going to be able to protect them from everything. And my oldest daughter, who's 13, I've essentially told her, I'm going to talk to you like you're an adult, because you're at that pre-adult mode, and we've got a good 6 years to figure things out together. And I'm going to talk to you in the way the world's going to talk to you when you're 18. And creating that space and creating that trust, that is the thing. That's the force field that protects the traumas. Is bad things will happen, but as long as they can come to you, it won't be as traumatic, because you can get through it.
So what are your thoughts on having them and making sure that they do go through some of those bad things and not protecting them from the bad things?
Well, it definitely goes back to one of my core principles of parenting that I learned is our primary responsibility is to them, not for them. And when you take responsibility for them, that everything they do is your fault, you take responsibility from them to grow up. So in many ways, I will consistently let whatever happen, or a consequence happen, or even an exaggerated case where if your kids get a ticket or they maybe even get jail time or something, there is a lesson that needs to be learned. And if I step in, so if think of any rich dad that makes problems go away, those kids never grow up, because those lessons are meant to teach them something. And when those parents step in to get that out of the way, they're not allowing that maturity. And it's almost, there is a really good analogy that I've learned over the years, that chicken eggs. So when a chicken is coming out of an egg, if you were to help the chicken break free of the egg, I don't remember the stat, but it has like a extremely high percentage, it won't make it, because this chicken needs to struggle. And that struggle to get out of the egg is actually what builds the resilience to survive. And by helping it break out of the egg, you're removing those initial instincts of how growth happens. And it's very much the same way. So it's the other thing that I always think about, especially when my kids are still young, is I'm going to protect my family from the big things, but I'm going to create an environment where it's safe for them to fail safely. They can get back up. Or in some cases, I think of fatherhood like scaffolding, that there's going to be the scaffolding around the building that we are using while we're building it, and we can use it as a support structure. But within that ecosystem, we're going to fail safely and learn the lessons that we can from it.
Yeah, I tend to, because since this is the BizDad podcast, I look at things as a business perspective. And I look at me as the CEO of my 3 little businesses. You know, you're the CEO of your 4 little businesses. And as the CEO, we need to guide, mentor, provide the vision for them to be able to execute on. And then once they're out of the house, once they're 18 and they've kind of moved on, now I become a board of advisors, like I'm just here. Like if I'm the CEO that is in here telling them what to do and making sure that all this is getting done, and I'm working so much in the business, then the business doesn't grow. Like if you're a business owner and you're doing nothing but work in the business instead of on the business, your business doesn't grow. And it's the same thing with your kids. If you're constantly just moving these things around for them and you're becoming the new term, the snowplow parent, right? Instead of the helicopter parent that's always hovering and making sure that everything's done, the snowplow is just pushing every bad thing out of the way, not letting them experience anything, and always just right there for them. Again, you're not building resilience. You're not helping them grow. You're never going to let them be able to be the CEO of their own life. They just become dependent on you. And like, I don't need a kid dependent on me that's 25. I talk about it all the time that I'm sick and tired of seeing 35-year-old boys walking around instead of 35-year-old men. Like, we need a society that teaches that men can be men and go out and chop wood and be okay to be masculine. And it's not toxic and it's not a bad thing that men are doing manly things.
What you're really talking about is one of my favorite lenses to look through is maturity. And so what we really also have a bigger pandemic of is immaturity. And those responsibilities, those lessons, those are the things that mature you. And if we protect our kids from maturing, then that's what ultimately creates that ambition to go out and lead yourself. And it's that maturity to be a fully functional, capable adult that it's even recognizing where we set things up in different ways. And something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is what I don't remember the verse, but essentially it's just reminding that God's ways are higher than our ways, that trying to rationalize how he thinks isn't possible because his ways are higher than our ways. And how many times does society rationalize that God's just old fashioned? God doesn't live in 2025, that we should be able to move in before we get married. We should be able to have sex before marriage. And these are all things that I bought into. I didn't have the wisdom to hold back. And realizing now that, like, you know why we need to wait till have sex till our marriage? Because if you have it before, you confuse lust for love. And working with men 15 years into their marriage and 20 and everything it all fall apart, I'm realizing, no, that's why you don't do it before, because you need to bond on who they are. So that way you can see the red flags. But the moment you bond sexually, you don't see the red flags. All you see is, man, that felt good. And you get hooked on that versus the actual person. And we don't think that way, but realizing, oh, that's why God says it the way he does. It's because his way is higher than our way. And even something by like even 14, to bring it back to the present with parenting my kids, I ultimately frame it, it's not my job to protect my kids at around 14 and up. It's simply my job to be there to make sure they get through it. That whatever happens, to be someone they can count on, to have a conversation. Like by 14, it's not my goal, although I'm not going to say condoning it, but it's not my job to protect them from what pornography is. It's my job to protect them from violence. That these are conversations that are out there, and I'm going to talk to them about it and make sure they hear my definition of it first, and realizing that I just want them there when life happens. They're coming back to me. Even a little, I don't have it done yet because they're not driving, but I've had this idea that when my daughter does get her license for the first time, there's going to be a note in the glove box right next to the insurance that says, no matter what happened, you can call me. It'll be okay.
Yeah. And
because
go ahead. Because what?
That's really the moment you're training for, is when they're in an accident, when they're at a party, when they're not safe, when something has happened. Are you the safest person in their mind that comes to their mind? Most dads are not, because of the rage, the anger. Maybe they don't have any connection. Maybe they've been lost in work for 20 years. That component is the part that we don't think about.
So let's talk to that dad who has that little bit of rage, that the person who's lost in their business, that isn't, that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, to try to talk to those dads, especially like the ones that, I'm sure you saw it when you were in the military, the massive amounts of divorce that were out there, the split parents, the split households, dads who never saw their kids because of, they'd been divorced for whatever long. And there's another man now in the house raising their kid. And then I came into the business world, and it was slightly different, but yet, it wasn't, again, history didn't repeat itself, but it rhymed really well, where the dad was so focused on business that, they were quote unquote building a business for their family. But yet they never saw their family. They're potentially on the edge of divorce, or if they're already divorced and not seeing their kids and worrying about how they're going to split the business. So let's talk to those dads who are on that bubble, who are struggling perhaps with the rage, who are struggling with the, stepping away from the business to be able to work with their kids. How do we coach them and guide them into focusing in the right direction, to know that their legacy is more about their last name than it is about the building that they're in?
So there's two sides to this, really. There's one that, in my experience so far, men only wake up mostly when their kids come home pregnant, either their daughter or their son's got someone's pregnant, and they realize, oh, I didn't pay attention. And the second one is when they get divorced, or when their wife wants a divorce, and they're like, oh, I think I messed up. Prior to those two big giant wake-ups, men are almost in a state of slumber. And so the first step is they have to wake them up, because in my conversations, men have very little awareness of the deficit that they're creating at home. That even in my best public speaking, even in my best one-liners that can kick them right in the pants, there's moments where it's like, you don't get it, or you're wrong, or you don't just understand my life. I have to do it this way. And I'm like, you can believe that, but I know what you don't know, which I know where it ends. Doing the addiction recovery work has really taught me that these are people just like the men that you described, except they use the illegal drugs and it brought them there. Except most men are using the drugs that we're rewarded for, which is status and career and title and money. And it's ultimately something that I was just kind of listening to recently in a podcast, is realizing that most men who go into that status, even in the military, whether it be a rank that they're trying to acquire, whether it's that progress, it's that next promotion, it's the next thought, it's the next impact, influence, I want to manage 10,000 people, whatever that thing is that you're chasing, ultimately we need to go back to the core wound. And this is a place where, if you're listening to this, I would really slow down and feel this moment. When you were growing up, was it warm or was it cold? Was that environment enriched with love or was it lack? What were those two relationships with mom and dad? Because ultimately, the most dangerous thing that happens in society today is men will focus on success and they'll realize that success can replace the love that they didn't get growing up. And we're rewarded for it. It feels similar, but it's never enough, which is why we always go for more. One of the most common things you hear about people who make over $500 million is they will describe, I got $500 million and it still didn't solve the problem. And you realize how many people get to that high and realize, you know what, I built a $2 billion business to solve the problem, and $2 billion couldn't fill the hole that my parents left. And recognizing that that success is a mask that we put on that becomes our identity. And it's that identity that we've been living in survival. Because if you think back to that childhood wound, it goes back to, who did we have to become to survive? Who did we have to become to get that little bit of nurturing and love that we were looking for? And how did we grow up with that? And what did we have to become? Even thinking about the high school quarterback, which is a very common one in my mind for stories, like often those are some of the most insecure people because they became the high school quarterback because they wanted the attention because they couldn't get it anywhere else. Or maybe that was the only way they got dad's attention. I recently was coaching with a college football coach, made over $500,000 a year, ultimately success by every measure of the standard. But behind the scenes, everything was falling down. Marriage was falling down. He was just becoming a new dad. He was struggling with connection. He was struggling with intimacy. Massive issues all behind it. But his success took him to mountains that you'd be like, man, that guy's made it. And it continues to kind of in awe of really how bad it is out there in some cases, where people will reach monumental successes by society's standards. But at the same time, I know what they don't know, which is that drug that you got there with will not be the drug that sustains you. It'll be the drug that bankrupts you. And most people don't think that way. They don't realize they're chasing something and realizing that no matter what you achieve, nothing will make up for what you do at home. Or even putting your name on a building in that context. You can put your name on 15 buildings, but you will always have a greater impact on this world by spending that same time with your kids. And that's why I've prioritized being at home. That's why I built my business to be at home, because I know no matter how many men I help, no matter how many people I help reframe their story and do my magic on, I know on every given day, my time will have greater impact spent with my kids. And men don't see their legacy that way. Even in the military, I remember talking to an Army guy getting out. He did 20 years. He had an entire transition plan, volunteering, getting a new job. He was going to volunteer with the Boy Scouts. And I remember like pausing for a second. I was like, can I ask you a question? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, you just spent 10 minutes talking to me about your plan, but you never included your two sons. And his sons were like 16 and 17. So right there on the shipping into life. And he's like, oh, I never considered them part of my plan. And I was like, huh? You just spent 20 years borrowing time from them while you were in and never considered to pay it back and like use your pension that you now have to take 2 years off and make sure that they have what they need while they grow into adulthood. That thought was not even in the circumference of what he was thinking. So that's like the real conundrum of it, is the component where we're trying to figure out the part that we need to wake up, but then we also need to realize we're not even playing with a full deck of cards.
All right. So you mentioned not being, not playing with a full deck of cards. And, I'd originally asked you, how do we talk to and break through to these people who are struggling? And honestly, it almost sounded like they may not see it until it hits him in the face with one of those two problems, a divorce or, a pregnant child or a child who got somebody pregnant. Right. So, but, I know that we're not necessarily saying that it's defeated all the way to that. So what is it that you've seen you can break through on those things, right? Hopefully it's just this conversation. They hear it and go, wow, I am on that road to that. Is it just simple conversations? I usually talk to people about a wireframe they look at life through, right? So, you talked about it through the lenses. You have somebody, I'm forgetting his name right now, but he talks about, anyways, it doesn't matter. Everybody's got a different idea about how they view life. And I talk about how a wireframe, and you have this wireframe, just like a website has a wireframe from page to page, that I view life through that wireframe until somebody comes and crumples it up. I'd like to crumple up that wireframe for as many men as I can that have looked at life in a different frame of mind. Their frame of reference is different. And now we need to adjust that so they can see that this is possible to change these things. And usually it is a person, a story, a thing that happens in life that crumples up that wireframe. So let's crumple up that wireframe for some of these guys to say, hey, this is possible. Let's go ahead and work this and adjust your thought process right now. So what is the best way for somebody right now to change that thought process and say, okay, now it's time for me to adjust how I'm looking at my kids. It's time for me to adjust how I'm running my business. It's time for me to adjust all of this stuff.
The first question that popped up, that if you're going to wake up, the first kind of like, if this is day one of inner reflection, I've never looked inside, I'm always looking outside. First question is kind of, why am I where I am? And how did I get here? Very few people spend time wondering, why am I where I am? Why did I become a doctor? And to me, I'm almost so conscious of different thoughts that I forget that most people aren't really conscious to why they are where they are. And if you realize when you ask the question, you are where you are, potentially because of a story that you picked up way early on in life, you're like, you know what? I don't necessarily think I want to be here. And then you can get a chance to realize this isn't my story. Like that's kind of like an initial wake up call, is this story was never mine to run. This was never my story to live, but somehow I just started doing what my dad did, and I never paused for a second to think that it was different. Or even within that story, what lie did you start believing early on that you now know was a lie, but you thought it was a truth? Because a lot of times, even the lie that if you bought into Leave It to Beaver, that yes, you should go to work, you should come home, read the paper, and dinner will be on the table. That is a version, that is 1.0 masculinity. There's nothing about that that's leadership. That is just providing. That's not sheltering. That's not shepherding your kids. That's not leading in a way God called you to lead. And realizing that sometimes even the lies of like happy wife, happy life, these are things that the world has influenced us with, but recognizing, no, we need to go back to the Bible because his ways are higher than our ways. So that's how I kind of audit those lies. But I would ultimately, something that I've learned working with the people in addiction recovery is there's kind of this lie that there's something that they think they're in control of, whether it be their alcohol, whether it be their anger. There is something inside them that they're assuming they have under control, but they don't. And it's that lie that's because the thing that they think they're having control under is actually controlling them. And that's what's influencing even like something like alcohol, where you don't realize you think you have it under control, but every alcoholic thinks they have it under control until they realize, oh, I don't. This is actually affecting the people that matter to me. Even recently, I haven't given up alcohol, but I've definitely turned it down to a trickle because it was ultimately just getting in the way between me and God. And I was like, I don't want anything between me and God. And I wasn't out of control with it, but it was influencing how I could hear God and realizing like, no, I need to be able to hear God in a very crystal clear way. So it's identifying those things that you're secretly controlling. Another interesting question that might open up to where things happened is, when did your childhood end? when did something happen in your childhood where the innocence ended? Because usually that becomes a precipice for change, for something that you became on the other side of that. Even this past week, something I did with the addiction recovery was, is there a decision in your life when you made it, you went an entirely 90-degree different direction? One of them was sharing something that happened in a relationship, and they shared it. And he's like, my life was never the same after I made that mistake. And there are moments like that we don't really think about because we think we can hide from it. Because that's what ultimately these things are that are controlling us, is we think we can shove them in the closet. We think we can hide from them. We can think we can keep these shadows away, and we can become these people with the egos that the world accepts and the world loves. But at the same time, that ego is what's destroying you. And something that I like to just say in my work is, if I did my job well, the ego should be torched, because it's not about survival. It's become about who you are in your original identity. And that doesn't need ego, but ego is rooted in survival. So that idea of who did you have to become to survive? Like, that's how you kind of initially wake up to realize, I'm done surviving. I'm done running like I need to keep running from something. Like, even watching people's language, or like saying like, I just can't catch up, or I always feel like I'm behind. And it's like, well, what are you trying to chase? What are you behind from? What is chasing you? And there's a lot of times it's a bad story, a bad moment, a bad memory, a trauma that they've been running from their entire life. No one ever just paused to say, hey, it looks like you're running. Have you ever thought of taking a break? Or even something I've called my coaching sessions is, a lot of times we're accelerating faster. I call my executive coaching sessions decelerating executive coaching sessions, because we need to slow it down so we can look at the lay of the land. And that's maybe even a red flag. If you feel like your life is moving by at a light speed, that ultimately kind of speaks to that if you were to slow down, you'd be terrified at what would happen. And we kind of saw this with COVID. When life slowed down, it was like the day after I always use it as a frat party. It's like waking up the day after a frat party, and you're like, where did all these beer cans come from? And you didn't notice that there was a party the night before, and we're doing life so fast, we didn't realize there was just a party going on and there were beer cans everywhere. It's like, oh, because we didn't slow down and notice the moments that are right in front of us.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the ego in there, and I think that's one of those things that if you don't really know who you are and who you want to be, then you just become your ego, and where the ego wants to bring you around. You haven't identified who you are yet, and and your kids are going to choose who they want. Oh, here's my little lady back again. And your kids are going to end up choosing based off of their ego, because they didn't have any guidance from you on where they're supposed to be going and what they're supposed to be doing.
And this is the primary role of the father, is to help them see who God is, said them to be, and to create that environment where you can course correct where the world might have given them a bad story, help them work through bad thoughts that the world has told them. I mean, even when they were bickering with each other as siblings early on, I would use this metaphor of like, is what your brother said true? No. Well, you get to decide what the world says about you. No one else can. And that is something that has definitely helped my son deal with having two sisters on either side of him, because he doesn't have to accept what they say about him. He gets to define. And even when we were camping, it's about that bond of helping him see who I see, and creating that, let's call it conviction, in that identity in Christ and God, and giving him the discipline to go out there and be who I see him to be, and who God sees him to be. And I had this thought random when I was mowing the yard 2 weeks ago, and Evan was out in the yard, and I smiled at him and he smiled back at me, and it hit me that, like, early on in kids' life, we are the closest thing to the Heavenly Father they get to see. And if a lot of dads don't even smile, how are kids supposed to know that God is happy with them when we're the reflection of what God is in those early years? And we're supposed to reflect back that they're good. And even many dads miss that opportunity to remind them that, like, you are good, you are loved, you are enough, and smile back at them, because that's like the infectious part of being a toddler, is they love to smile and they'll always reflect it back to you. Like, that's like a heavenly trait that we overestimate in some simple moment because you're going too fast. that you don't realize, like smiling at your kids can ultimately change how they see you and see themselves.
Yeah, and I've talked about that. I think even on the last podcast, I chat about that with a guy that's his dad had another girlfriend, another house, another everything just kind of hidden from view, and it wasn't found out until after the divorce. Everything was moved on. It was like years later that it was all found out. But after the dad left, he became stronger in his faith. And I was curious because it's one of those things that as a Christian man trying to raise young Christian kids, to not believe what the world says, but to believe what God says, and to represent that here on earth. I think about all of the families with those broken dads. Obviously we're all broken to a certain extent, but their dad left them. Their dad is gone. They have an unbelievably terrible, or their dad abuses them and all this stuff. Like how is that child ever going to see the love of God as their father when they have such a horrible worldly example? So, I want to always look at a way to, okay, how can I be a good worldly example for my kids of what God actually is as their father, not a terrible worldly example. And man, oh man, is that a challenge, right? But it's a good thing to keep in our mind, is like we are representing a higher power. So how can we show up on a day-to-day basis for our kids to see that love and feel that love? And it's not by building a bigger empire.
Correct. And even something that I think about as when I'm working with other men is almost synopsisly, everybody is a brother to me. And some of that is just colloquial, but the other parts is like, no, we're all brothers in Christ. So like everybody is a brother to me. And I'm big on giving hugs. And in some cases, I feel like my hugs are healing because it's the hug that no one ever gave them. Even when I'm helping people understand their inner child, it's like, it sounds like your 6-year-old self just needed a hug in that moment and your dad gave you a belt. Giving that emotion some language allows them to feel it properly. And even if you're listening to this and you're in the category of dumpster fire parents on either side, like this is where as an adult, you can't go back and change your parents, but you can change how the story ends. So C.S. Lewis has a good quote that you can't change how your story starts, but you can always change how it ends. And so once you have the awareness of like, man, I've been running on something, and maybe you're 45, maybe you're 50, or maybe even 60 and you're listening to this. It doesn't matter how old you are when you wake it up. The most important part is what you do after. And I always describe your earthly father might have left wounds in you, but the heavenly father can fill in the gaps. And in some ways, the Bible is a giant love letter about what he does think about us. So putting those ways higher than our ways and putting those ways first, even remembering that Jesus called us to build a foundation on the rock, and the rock isn't just a rock. The rock is the word. So building that foundation in the biblical word is in many ways replacing the word and the foundation you didn't get from your father early on. But we have to accept responsibility for what we inherited, make sure we're not passing it on, because something even, it's a little bit sad at the same time, generational trauma is something that happens at a genetic level and can take almost 3 generations for it to be removed at the genetic level. So if you've had a traumatic 100-year lifespan in your family story, there are things in your DNA that it's going to take 3 generations to break free from. That there is psychology that's going to happen within your kids despite your best efforts. Knowing that, it can end with you. But also knowing that even if there's an interesting way to frame parents who had, or kids who had parents that were not always great, is just because they didn't stop everything doesn't mean they didn't stop some. And so it's often easy to be like, man, you really screwed me up. But we don't never really know is what they came from was screwed up and they stopped 75%, but the last 25 still felt enough. And we have to be able to accept, in Jocko words, just accept that extreme ownership of it didn't start with me, but it will end with me. And I am essentially, that's been my commitment, is become the man that is fully healed, and that I become someone that has a light so bright that by being near me, I simply cast away other shadows. That God didn't put us here to play small. God didn't put us here to live in small stories. He put us here to be built big stories. Even remembering if we are children of God and we are built in his image, there is nothing small about those words. It's something massive. It's something impactful. And realizing that story is something we can step into, but we have to find the language of what that story is.
I absolutely love that. That's phenomenal. I want to shift gear. Well, actually, I want to make a comment on that first, but it's one of the reasons I ask about dads, like your dad and all of my guests, their dad, is if we can kind of understand who our dads were, we can understand what they may have gone through that led them to do the things they did that we can now learn from and adjust. Maybe it's not until we're 40. Maybe it's not until we're 50. But if we can understand who they are, the sooner, obviously, the better. But if we can understand who they are, what they experienced, that what they have sheltered us from, we may have still got a little bit wet underneath that umbrella, but that umbrella blocked a lot. And then we can block even more from our kids with our umbrella. Yes, their feet still make it a little bit wet, but the goal would be to make it better and better and better. And again, raise better men than me, just as my dad was doing his best to do that as well. So I really love that.
I frame it as simply just thinking of like spending time thinking about how did they learn to see the world? Because that's actually more powerful, because then you just get to know them as a human being. And that's how you can have empathy even for what they grew up with. Instead of just hating them, learn how they saw the world, because then you can understand. Because the other thing when it comes to trauma is no matter what people do, in the moment, everybody feels it's the right choice. Even if it's the worst freaking thing you can possibly imagine, when someone's doing it, even with veteran suicide, I learned in the process that most veterans take their life out of logic, not out of like depression, not out of losing their mind. Like it's a logical conclusion. And so even those crazy thoughts, like it's a logical choice. So the mind is ultimately doing what feels logical in the moment and trying to understand how your father saw logic in whatever he did, even if it was flawed, allows you to see them as a flawed child of God in the same way that Adam and Eve essentially cursed us, and allows you to connect with them deeper and allows you to almost stop holding on to that story, because you realize he did what he did and he did what he had. And as much as I got, I still have more, than I'm still alive, and I still have an opportunity to impact with what I know.
Absolutely. Well, now you're impacting in a different way in your business. So I want to dig into, little lady wants to get down now. I want to kind of go into the business side of the house and talk about what you're doing on a day-to-day in the business side of the house, and how you're growing and how you're kind of helping other men get kind of through their stuff. So talk to me in depth about what you have going on in business.
It's kind of in a trifecta. I feel like it's in one mode, getting in the clients in the business to pay the bills. But then in the second mode, it's getting closer and closer to the ideal avatar, which is a CEO who makes over $500,000 a year, that essentially has built this massive identity, that is really struggling to lay down the armor, lay down the mask, and really come home and love his wife, love his kids. So like that's really where my aim is. But in the present moment, what that looks like is finding workshops to do around how to lead in an impactful way, finding leadership workshops to even go back into the early stages where I didn't know about leadership and how to self-lead, how to work on communication, these simple supervisory type stuff. Even within my own background in electrical engineering, I have now kind of described myself as like a systems engineer, but for people. So I see people in relays and diodes and circuit boards, just like I would as a systems engineer in my previous role. And I just troubleshoot in the same kind of way. So I do that currently with working with business owners. I've been working with some insurance agencies, because there's a lot of mask with insurance agencies. They put on a good, everything's okay to the world, but secretly behind, they're crushing behind. Even in the last year, the insurance rates have been going up and business has been harder to get and people are switching. So that's been an odd area of success and growth that I wasn't expecting, but it's been working well. And then also with people that essentially have been promoted. This is a new kind of category that I've been working with. People that have been promoted, they need to work out, they're going to work out, and they have big plans for them as they grow in the career and where they want them to land in the company. And they need essentially like an insurance policy to make sure they get there. Working with those people one-on-one as either a high fast track partner route or a high talent route, and making sure that these people we're investing in, because a lot of times there's this illusion in business leadership where, oh, they're good at their job, let's promote them. And it's like, no, these are two different things, especially in the technical manufacturing world. Just because you can manage a production line and punch out press really good and get a team to do it efficiently doesn't always mean that you're ready to do something bigger. So understanding that at the same time, moving forward. So working with those people and helping them like, yeah, you've been promoted. Let's make sure you work out. Let's have one-on-one conversations so that you can get the skills that you need, have a safe place to talk about that. And the one-on-one has really been my favorite spot, more than I initially even liked, or initially thought I would like, because I thought I'd had to do it in a bunch of other different ways and speaking and workshops. But the more and more I keep going, the one-on-ones is where my most impact has been done. And then even as a brand new thing, I started a membership called Impact Arena. So it's kind of based on what I have behind me is the Man in the Arena quote by Teddy Roosevelt, where it's about being the man in the arena, but having your face marred by dirt and dust. And it's this idea that there's thousands of men that are in the sidelines, essentially, watching other people play out on the field of life and not know how to get into that arena. Because that's essentially where I was. That's the place that I got stuck. I wanted more, but I had no idea how to get in the game. And so the Impact Arena has an acronym, and we work through the acronym, and it essentially is, how do you lead your life in a way that's impactful in your marriage, your leadership, your family, and all the different nuances that go with it. And even things of like, how do you lead your life in a way that impacts her heart? How do you penetrate your wife's heart, not just physically? And these deeper methods. So I've just started, and it's already got some really good momentum, and the conversations are really doing well. So I'm really excited about that opportunity and making that bigger. And I've kind of coined a new term called an impactpreneur. Still trying to kind of figure out what to do with that, but I always like the name of it, and it always sounds nice when I say it. So helping people go from those sidelines to the arena, so that way, if you want more impact, you realize you're playing small. And essentially, a way I described it, that this is the thing that I really needed in 2014. I wasn't in the game. I knew I needed to be in the game. I was meant to play life at a bigger level, but I had no idea how. I'm going back and helping those men get back in the game that I needed, essentially.
All right. So on that happy note, Ben, if people are hearing you and they're like, dude, I totally want to reach out to you. I want to hear more about what you have going on. I want to jump into your community. I want to maybe do some one-on-one coaching. What is the best way for folks to reach out to you?
Because this is the BizDad Podcast, I'm going to go with LinkedIn. So look me up on LinkedIn, Ben Killoy, Killoy. My email is ben@benkilloy.com. You can shoot me an email there as well. But LinkedIn, I'm active there. If you want to flirt with me there and just follow along before we have a real conversation, always posting good things there. I do a newsletter there as well on leadership, and essentially posting what I call the truth, and trying to strip away what I know to be true and then help people see what they need to see. So LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me.
Absolutely love it. Ben Killoy, Killoy. Go find him out there on LinkedIn. Ben, it was great to catch up with you and hear more about what you have going on. I loved having you on here. I love your outlook on fatherhood and where you're trying to drive to. And I appreciate your vulnerability and openness to be able to communicate with folks and letting them know kind of everybody is going to be going through struggles. Everybody has some of these issues. It's working through them and growing to become a better man, a better human, a better dad is what we should all be working to do. So thank you very much for being a good example of that.
The real thing that I often think about is it's a lot of what my current journey feels like still sometimes is Psalms 23. It's the balance of he is with you, he will shepherd you, but some days are going to feel like you're in the valley and you're going to be walking through that darkness, but you have to remind yourself that he is with you. And it's that conviction that gives you the discipline to know your purpose, know your design, and to know that it's good, and to keep going through that valley.
I love it. What a way to close it out. Thank you again, Ben, so very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening and chiming in. Please tell us below in a comment what your favorite part was. Like and subscribe. Leave us a review. Let us know what you thought about this podcast. Reach out to Ben if there's anything he could do to help serve you. Thank you all for listening. Thank you again, Ben, for jumping on, and we will see everybody on the next show.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much for listening to the BizDad Podcast. We hope you found some value in your time here with us, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and share so you and your friends won't miss our upcoming episodes. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Rumble, where we continue these discussions and share more valuable content. Be the dad you know you need to be and run your business in a way you're proud to share with your kids. Keep crushing it.